What if the strongest hero from DC Comics suddenly appeared in the most brutal universe ever created? What if a being who stands for hope, truth, and justice found himself in a galaxy where there is only war, where compassion is heresy, and where the very concept of mercy can doom entire worlds? This is the story of what happens when the last son of Krypton crashes into the grim darkness of Warhammer 40K, where his greatest strengths become his most dangerous vulnerabilities, and where even Superman must choose between his ideals and humanity's survival. The sky above Meridian Prime split open like a wound in reality itself. Crimson light bled across the night, painting the towering hive spires in shades of blood and fire. Billions of Imperial citizens looked up from their endless labor to witness something falling from that cosmic tier. A streak of fire descending like a meteor toward their world. Orbital defense platforms powered their weapons, targeting arrays locking onto the anomaly with mechanical precision. Planetary Defense Force commanders barked orders through Vox channels, mobilizing forces that had defended this world against Xenos raids for generations. Governor Marcus Valerian stood on his palace observation deck, magnification lenses pressed against his augmented eyes as he tracked the descending object. This was no debris from a dying ship, no piece of space junk burning through atmosphere. The trajectory was controlled, demonstrating intelligence and purpose. His military advisor whispered urgently beside him, recommending immediate weapons authorization, but Valerian hesitated. Something about this intrusion felt different from the countless Xenos threats he'd faced. The object resolved itself in the night sky, not a spacecraft or weapon, but a figure, humanoid in shape, broad-shouldered, suspended impossibly in midair without any visible means of propulsion. Blue fabric covering a powerful frame, crimson cape flowing behind despite the absence of wind in the void. Upon the chest, a distinctive symbol that matched no imperial heraldry in Valerian's extensive memory. The figure descended slowly now, approaching the governor's palace with obvious intention. Valerian's hand moved instinctively toward his ornate bolt pistol, standard equipment for any imperial official who understood how quickly leadership could become a target. But before he could draw, the being spoke, his voice carrying across the distance without Vox amplification, clear and powerful yet somehow gentle. Your world faces immediate danger. I can see ships approaching from beyond your system's edge, biological vessels carrying hostile organisms. I've come to help. Valerian's blood ran cold. Tyranids. The Administratum had warned of hive fleet activity in neighboring sectors, but Meridian Prime wasn't supposed to be in their path. If this stranger spoke truth, millions would die within days unless reinforcements arrived. The nearest Imperial Navy battle group was weeks away at best. "What are you?" Valerian demanded, his voice steady despite the dread filling his chest. "Speak truthfully, for the Emperor's light reveals all deception." The figure landed gracefully on the palace balcony, close enough now for Valerian to see his features clearly. Human in appearance, yet possessing a perfection that seemed almost unnatural. Strong jaw, clear blue eyes radiating both power and compassion, an expression Valerian hadn't seen in decades of Imperial service. "My name is Kal-El, though I've been called Superman. My world was destroyed long ago, and I was sent away as an infant. I've spent my life protecting those who cannot protect themselves. That dimensional rift brought me here to this universe. I don't fully understand how or why, but I recognize danger when I see it. Those ships approaching your world carry death. Let me help you face them." Before Valerian could respond, alarms shrieked throughout the palace. Tactical displays in the command center flared to life, showing exactly what the stranger had predicted. Multiple bioships had translated from the warp at the system's edge, their grotesque organic forms already releasing swarms of smaller attack craft. Mycetic spores burned through space toward Meridian Prime, each one carrying warrior organisms designed for slaughter. The governor's military staff erupted into organized chaos, implementing defensive protocols perfected through centuries of warfare. But every officer present understood the mathematics of their situation. Meridian Prime's orbital defenses could destroy perhaps 30% of the incoming assault. The rest would reach the surface, and once Tyranids established ground presence, nothing short of orbital bombardment could eradicate them. Bombardment that would kill everyone they were trying to save. Kal-El looked toward the approaching threat, his enhanced vision penetrating distance and darkness with ease. How long until those spores reach atmosphere? 18 minutes, reported the tactical officer, his voice hollow with the knowledge of what that meant. Estimated initial casualties, 42 million citizens. Complete planetary infestation within 1 week without immediate Navy intervention. Then we don't have time for proper introductions. The Kryptonian's jaw set with determination. Point me toward the greatest concentration of incoming threats. What followed defied everything Governor Valerian understood about warfare, physics, and reality itself. The being called Superman simply leapt skyward, accelerating to speeds that should have torn apart any biological organism. Within seconds, he had reached the upper atmosphere where the first mycetic spores were beginning their descent. Through the palace's orbital observation systems, Valerian and his staff watched in stunned silence as a single figure intercepted an entire Tyranid assault wave. Where Superman's fists connected with the biological pods, they detonated spectacularly, raining harmless organic debris instead of ravening horrors. His eyes projected beams of intense heat that scoured entire swarms from existence. He moved through the void without protection, without oxygen, without any of the elaborate life support systems that should have been absolutely necessary. The methodical destruction continued for hours. Each mycetic spore eliminated, each bioship approach vector disrupted. The Kryptonian worked with tireless efficiency, accomplishing what would have required an entire Imperial Navy battle group operating at peak capacity. By the time Meridian Prime's sun rose over the eastern hive spires, the immediate threat had been neutralized. The surviving bioships retreated to the system's edge, their hive mind recognizing an unprecedented obstacle. Kal-El descended to the governor's palace once more, his blue suit and crimson cape unmarked despite the hours of combat in the void. Valerian noted the being wasn't even breathing hard, showed no signs of exhaustion or damage. Whatever this Superman was, he operated by rules that transcended normal human limitations, transcended even the enhanced capabilities of the Emperor's space marines. "Your world is temporarily safe," Kal-El reported, his tone carrying quiet satisfaction. "But they'll send more forces. I can help you prepare better defenses, coordinate with your arriving reinforcements." Valerian studied the being before him, weighing impossible factors. Everything about this stranger screamed Xeno's infiltrator, or worse, warp-spawn deception wearing human form. Yet he had just saved 40 million lives without hesitation, without demanding anything in return. The governor had served the Imperium for 6 decades and understood one certainty: nothing in this galaxy gave power freely without expecting something in exchange. "What do you want?" Valerian asked bluntly. "What price for your intervention?" Genuine confusion crossed Kal-El's perfect features. "Price? I don't want payment. Where I come from, those with power have a responsibility to protect those without it. It's not transactional. It's just the right thing to do." The naivety of that statement actually made Valerian flinch. This being possessed godlike power, yet displayed the moral reasoning of a child's story, all simple heroism and uncomplicated nobility. In the grim calculus of the 41st millennium, such innocence was more dangerous than any Xeno's weapon. "Nothing in this universe is free, stranger. Every action carries consequence. Every power demands allegiance." Valerian's hand moved to the emergency Vox system at his belt. "I'm grateful for your assistance, but the proper authorities must be notified. The Inquisition will have many questions about your nature and origins." Before Superman could respond, reality itself seemed to flex and tear. A second-dimensional wound opened above the palace, and through it came something that made even the Kryptonian's confident expression falter. Warp-tainted ships burst into real space, their hulls distorted by millennia of exposure to the immaterium. Chaos vessels, bearing the marks of the Blood Disciples, a warband entirely dedicated to Khorne, the Blood God. Kal-El's enhanced hearing picked up the screams from across the planet as cultists, who had been waiting in hiding, suddenly activated. Chaos worshippers embedded in the population for years, perhaps decades, rising up in coordinated uprising. The Tyranid attack had been merely a distraction, weakening defenses for the true assault. This was the pattern of chaos, corruption from within, betrayal from trusted sources, the weaponization of humanity's own doubts and desires. "Governor, get your people to shelters," Kal-El said urgently. "Those ships carry warriors far more dangerous than the biological organisms I just fought." Valerian needed no convincing. He'd fought chaos forces before, understood their threat on a visceral level that went beyond tactical considerations. You can't fight them alone. Chaos Space Marines are not merely enhanced humans. They're corrupted by forces you cannot comprehend. They wield weapons powered by the warp itself. I've faced corrupt beings before. Beings who called themselves gods, who wielded impossible power. Kal-El moved toward the balcony edge. I won't let them harm your people. What followed was Superman's first true test in this darker universe. The chaos forces that descended upon Meridian Prime were led by Vorgath the Bloodbringer, a Khorne Berzerker lord, whose armor was adorned with skulls of defeated champions. And then, when Kal-El intercepted their drop pods in midair, he discovered that chaos weapons could actually harm him, something the Tyranid bioweapons had failed to accomplish. First blow from a warp-infused chain axe actually drew blood. Superman's invulnerable skin, which had withstood nuclear explosions and survived planetary destruction, parted under the reality, warping edge of Khorne's blessed weapons. The shock of experiencing genuine physical pain after decades of near invulnerability caused him to hesitate, and that hesitation nearly cost him his life. Vorgath pressed the advantage, driving Superman from the sky with relentless ferocity. The Berserker Lord had slain entire companies of space marines, had offerings of 1,000 skulls to his dark patron. His every movement was supported by the will of a chaos god who cared nothing for physics or fairness, only for blood and slaughter. They crashed through the upper levels of a hive spire, their battle devastating inhabited sections and killing hundreds of civilians in the collateral destruction. Superman tried to minimize casualties, to fight defensively, to evacuate innocents while maintaining combat effectiveness. But Vorgath exploited every moment of restraint. Every instant Superman divided his attention to save a falling civilian or shield habitation blocks from stray fire. You fight like you have something to lose, Vorgath roared, his chain axe screaming as it carved through structural supports. Khorne teaches that victory demands sacrifice. Your weakness will feed my god. The Chaos Lord's words were accompanied by a psychic assault Superman hadn't anticipated. Whispers invaded his mind, not mere telepathic intrusion, but something deeper and more insidious. The voice of Khorne himself, or perhaps merely an echo of that blood god's endless hunger, promising power and victory if only Kal-El would stop holding back, would unleash his full strength without restraint. For a terrifying moment, Superman felt genuine temptation. Sapupo. How much easier his fight would be if he didn't constantly regulate his strength, didn't worry about collateral damage, didn't carry the burden of compassion. The whisper promised liberation from those chains, suggested that mercy was just another word for weakness. But then he heard something else, the voice of his father, both Jor-El of Krypton and Jonathan Kent of Kansas. Different men from different realities, both teaching the same lesson. That power without restraint wasn't strength, it was tyranny. The symbol on his chest represented hope, not domination. With that clarity came renewed determination. Superman stopped fighting defensively and engaged Vorgath directly, matching the Berserker's aggression, but channeling it toward a singular purpose, ending the threat quickly to minimize civilian casualties. When the Chaos Lord raised his chain axe for a killing blow, Kal-El caught the weapon's blade with both hands, enduring the pain as warp fire seared his palms and broke it over his knee. The destruction of such a blessed weapon sent psychic shockwaves through the surrounding area. Vorgath staggered, momentarily disconnected from Khorne's empowerment. Superman seized that instant, landing a calculated blow that shattered the Chaos Marine's armor and sent him crashing through multiple floors to the Hive City's lower levels. But before Kal-El could press the advantage, a new presence made itself known. The warp rift that had brought the Chaos Fleet widened, and through it came something far worse than corrupted space marines. A greater demon of Khorne manifested in the material universe, drawn by the blood already spilled and hungry for more. The demon towered above even Vorgath, a nightmare amalgamation of brass, muscle, and rage given physical form. Its mere presence caused reality to warp, laws of physics bending around its impossible existence. When it spoke, mortal ears bled from the sound. What an interesting specimen. The demon's voice resonated across psychic and physical dimensions simultaneously. So much power, yet so much restraint. Tyranid, So much potential, yet so much wasted compassion. You would make a magnificent champion once properly corrupted. Superman faced the demon without flinching, though everything in his enhanced senses screamed that this entity was fundamentally wrong, an affront to natural law itself. I don't know what you are, but you're not welcome here. Leave now, or I'll make you leave. The demon's laughter shook the foundations of nearby buildings. Make me leave, child. I am eternally manifest in the warp. You cannot kill what was never truly alive. You cannot defeat what exists beyond your comprehension of reality. Their battle lasted for hours, devastating entire sectors of the Hive City. Superman discovered that conventional attacks had minimal effect on the demon's warp substance. It simply reconstituted after each blow, reforming from the spilled blood and violence that empowered it. Every punch Superman landed, every burst of heat vision, every display of strength, all of it fed the demon, making it stronger. The creature's taunts grew more sophisticated as the fight progressed, demonstrating knowledge it shouldn't possess. It spoke of Krypton's destruction, of the guilt Superman carried for being the sole survivor. It whispered about everyone he'd failed to save across his heroic career, every villain who'd escaped justice, every civilian who'd died despite his best efforts. The demon weaponized his own memories and self-doubt, showing him twisted futures where his power corrupted, where his restraint failed, where he became the tyrant so many had feared. Kal-El felt his resolve weakening under the psychic assault. Not because the demon's arguments were logical, but because they touched on fears he'd harbored since childhood, the terror of losing control, of his strength becoming destructive rather than protective. The warp corruption from his wounds spread with each passing moment, black veins extending across his torso where demon claws had penetrated his invulnerable skin. Just as the darkness threatened to overwhelm him, salvation arrived from an unexpected source. A brilliant golden light blazed across the battlefield, and with it came warriors unlike any Kal-El had encountered. The Sisters of Battle advanced through the devastation, their hymns of faith creating a psychic barrier against chaos corruption. Behind them marched Grey Knights, space marines specifically trained to combat demonic threats, wielding weapons sanctified to harm warp entities. Leading them was Inquisitor Seraphine Varen of the Ordo Malleus, her power-armored form radiating authority and absolute conviction. She carried a staff topped with the Imperial Aquila that blazed with the Emperor's light, or at least with faith so absolute it manifested as tangible psychic force. Creature of the warp, Varen's voice cut through the demon's taunts. By the Emperor's light, I banish you. The demon turned its attention to this new threat, recognizing a familiar enemy. The sisters' hymns weakened its manifestation, their faith creating pockets of reality where the warp's influence couldn't penetrate. The Grey Knights engaged with coordinated precision, force weapons cutting at the demon's substance in ways that prevented easy reconstitution. Superman saw his opportunity. While the demon was distracted, he flew upward, accelerating past orbital velocity, past the system's edge, pushing his powers to their absolute limit. He carried the demon with him, grappling the warp entity despite the agony of touching its corrupting essence directly. In the cold void between stars, far from the faith and emotion that sustained demon manifestation, the creature's form began to destabilize. It thrashed and howled soundlessly in vacuum, its substance pulled between material reality and the immaterium. Finally, with a psychic scream that echoed across multiple dimensions, it unraveled completely, its essence returning to the warp. Kal-El hung in space for a long moment, his body racked with pain from wounds that refused to heal normally. The warp corruption had spread significantly, black veins now reaching toward his heart. He could feel something alien in his thoughts, whispers that hadn't been there before, urges toward violence and domination that were completely foreign to his nature. With the last of his strength, he turned back toward Meridian Prime, a barely conscious missile falling through atmosphere. He crashed into the governor's palace gardens, creating a crater that shook the entire structure. Inquisitor Varen and her retinue were waiting when he emerged from the impact site, weapons trained on him despite his obvious weakened state. Identify yourself completely, Varen commanded, her bolt pistol aimed steadily at Kal-El's head. By the authority of the Holy Inquisition, you will submit to examination immediately. Superman tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. The corruption burned through his body like acid, spreading faster now that he'd stopped moving. People, are there more civilians who need help? Varen's eyes narrowed behind her ornate helmet. Your concern for civilians is noted, but you represent an unprecedented threat. Power without sanction, ability without accountability, origin without explanation. The Imperium cannot tolerate such anomalies. I just saved millions of lives. Kal-El managed through the pain. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for an opportunity to prove your nature through proper interrogation rather than immediate execution. Varen gestured to her Grey Knights. Secure him. Full psychic containment protocols. If he resists, you are authorized to use lethal force. As the Space Marines moved to comply, their force field restraints crackling with warp-disrupting energy, Governor Valerian appeared from the palace. His face was ashen but determined. Inquisitor, with respect, this being saved my world when Imperial forces could not arrive in time. He fought alone against threats that would have required a full battle group to counter. Whatever he has demonstrated his willingness to protect Imperial citizens, which makes him more dangerous, not less. Varen's tone allowed no argument. Governor, you have witnessed but a fraction of this entity's capabilities. Imagine that power corrupted turned against humanity. Imagine him as a champion of chaos, a weapon of the Xenos, or worst of all, imagine the masses worshipping him as a rival to the Emperor himself. The last suggestion made Valerian pale. The Inquisitor was right. Already he'd heard whispers among his staff about the Angel in Blue, speculation about divine intervention and miraculous salvation. In the Imperium, such unauthorized faith was the first step toward heresy. Kal-El looked between them, trying to understand the implications of their conversation despite the pain clouding his thoughts. I'm not a god. I don't want worship. I just want to help people. Your intentions are irrelevant. Varen knelt beside him, close enough that he could see her eyes through her helmet's vision slits. They were hard but not cruel, the eyes of someone who'd made impossible choices for so long that mercy had become a dangerous luxury. This universe runs on different rules than wherever you originated. Here, power must be controlled, directed, sanctioned. The alternative is chaos in every sense of that word. She stood, signaling to her forces. You will be transported to Terra for judgment. The Emperor himself will determine your fate. As consciousness faded, Superman heard Valerian asking about the corruption spreading through his body. Varen's response was clinical, detached. If he survives the journey to Terra, the Emperor's psychic might converge the taint. If he doesn't survive, the question becomes moot. Either way, the Imperium's security is preserved. The last thing Kal-El saw before darkness claimed him was the symbol on his chest. The Kryptonian glyph for hope, now stained with his own blood and the black corruption of chaos. He'd come to this universe expecting to find people who needed saving, never imagining he might be the one in need of rescue. The journey to Terra took weeks despite warp transit. The Inquisition's vessel cut through the immaterium surrounded by psychic wards and blessed with prayers to the Emperor. Throughout the voyage, Grey Knights maintained constant vigil over Superman's containment chamber, ready to destroy him at the first sign of demonic possession. Kal-El drifted in and out of consciousness, experiencing nightmares unlike anything he'd known before. The chaos corruption showed him visions, twisted futures where his power had corrupted completely, where he ruled Earth as a tyrant, where everyone he'd ever saved came to fear and hate him. The line between vision and memory blurred, leaving him uncertain which horrors were real and which were warp-spawned deceptions. When they finally reached Terra, the birthplace of humanity, Superman was barely conscious enough to register the transition from ship to planetary transport. He caught fragmentary impressions, orbital platforms larger than cities, a planet encased in buildings and fortifications, psychic pressures so intense it felt like physical weight crushing him. They brought him before the Golden Throne, into the presence of the master of mankind himself. The Emperor of the Imperium had been entombed for 10,000 years, his body a withered husk sustained by impossibly ancient technology, while his consciousness fought an endless psychic war to protect humanity. Yet when Kal-El was brought before that throne, he felt something stirring, an attention so vast and powerful it made his Kryptonian strength seem insignificant by comparison. Communication occurred without words. Concepts impressed directly into Superman's mind, by a consciousness that had guided humanity for 40 millennia. The Emperor examined every aspect of Kal-El's existence, his Kryptonian heritage, his Kansas upbringing, his heroic career, his moral code, his hopes and fears and dreams. Nothing was hidden from that psychic scrutiny. In return, Superman glimpsed fragments of the Emperor's own history. A being who had walked among humanity since its earliest days, watching civilizations rise and fall, making impossible choices to ensure mankind's survival through one crisis after another.
No.
A person who had sacrificed literally everything, identity, mortality, peace, mercy itself, to serve as humanity's shield against threats most people couldn't even comprehend. The Emperor showed Kal-El what would happen if he simply returned to his home reality. Chaos would eventually manifest there too, and without preparation or warning, his Earth would fall to corruption just as countless worlds had fallen in this universe. He showed the consequences of allowing Superman to remain free in the Imperium, the religious schisms, the civil wars, the billions who would die in conflicts sparked by his mere existence. Then came the final revelation, a path forward that required sacrifice but offered purpose. The Emperor could heal the chaos corruption, could sanctify Superman's power within the Imperial framework, could transform him from a potential threat into a recognized protector. The cost would be autonomy. Khorne would become bound to the Imperium service, his actions directed by the needs of humanity's survival rather than his own moral compass. When the psychic communication ended, Superman found himself kneeling before the golden throne, tears streaming down his face. He'd witnessed 10,000 years of humanity's desperate struggle for survival, understood the weight of choices the Emperor had made, recognized the necessity of methods he'd always considered unacceptable. "I understand now," Kal-El spoke aloud, his voice hoarse. "You're not evil, you're just." Exhausted, carrying an impossible burden for so long that compassion became a luxury you couldn't afford. The Emperor's response was a single psychic impression, regret mixed with grim determination. "Yes, if I accept this, if I become what you need me to be, can I still protect the innocent? Can I still offer mercy when possible?" The answer came with absolute clarity, within limits. Priority must always be humanity's survival. But yes, mercy has value when circumstances allow. Superman thought of Jonathan Kent, the man who taught him that power without compassion was tyranny. He thought of Lois Lane, who'd shown him that truth mattered even when inconvenient. He thought of every person he'd ever saved, every child he'd rescued, every disaster he'd prevented. Then he thought of the millions on Meridian Prime who would have died without his intervention. The billions across this Imperium who faced threats no individual hero could counter alone. A galaxy where the luxury of individual morality might condemn entire species to extinction. "I'll do it," he said, finally. "Not because I agree with everything the Imperium stands for, but because leaving would be the same as abandoning people who need help, and that's something I can't do." Golden light filled the chamber as the Emperor's power engulfed him, burning away the chaos corruption with purifying fire that seared through every cell of his Kryptonian body. The pain was absolute and unending, but when it finally faded, Kal-El felt different, changed. Still himself, but now part of something larger. His costume had transformed. The blue became deeper, almost navy, the color of Space Marine power armor. The red cape now bore the Imperial Aquila along its edge. The symbol on his chest remained, but incorporated into the double-headed eagle that represented the Imperium of man. He was still Superman, but now he was also the Emperor's shield, a sanctioned protector whose power had been given context and purpose within humanity's theological framework. As he left the throne room, escorted by Adeptus Custodes who now treated him as a recognized asset rather than a threat, Superman wondered what Jonathan Kent would think of his choice. Whether his human father would understand the compromise, would accept the necessity of serving an empire whose methods contradicted everything they'd taught him about heroism. But then he remembered something else Pa Kent had said. "The world's too big for one man to save alone, Clark." Sometimes you need to trust others, even when you don't agree with everything they do. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where there was only war, the Last Son of Krypton had found his place. Not as the bright symbol of hope he'd been, but as something darker and more complex, a shield against the darkness, carrying the memory of hope into a universe that had forgotten its meaning. And across the galaxy, enemies of mankind, chaos cultists, Tyranid hive minds, scheming Xenos, and the Kryptonian collectorate still hunting for his genetic template, all sensed the emergence of a new factor in the endless war. Something that combined godlike power with human compassion, bound by duty to an empire that desperately needed both. The great game had a new player. Whether he represented salvation or simply another sacrifice on humanity's altar of survival remained to be seen. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor had a champion who remembered what it meant to offer hope instead of merely surviving another day. Superman had entered the darkness. Now he would discover whether his light could survive there, or whether even the strongest hero from a brighter universe would be ground down by the brutal reality of Warhammer 40K's endless war.